Do a review in the Likutei Sichos and Chelik Choftes, volume 29. This is the Sicha for Chai Elul. Chai Elul is the birthday of both the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe. And in a Sicha of the Friedrich Rebbe in Toshin Hay, printed in the Likutei Diburim, the Friedrich Rebbe spoke about what Chai Elul is, and he brought down two expressions that seem very similar one to another. And the Rebbe analyzes and shows how the two expressions are really talking about two separate aspects. Just like in the month of Elul, we have the Ani L'Doidi, the service of a Yid, the Sarusa de Latata, that we have to work and become closer to Hashem. But we also have in Elul, the Ha'oris Yid Gimel Midas Harachamim, the special support from above, so that we could do our avodah Isarusa de Latata, the Isarusa de Laela, which brings the Isarusa de Latata. The same thing is with the specific day of Chai Elul in these two expressions. First represents the day itself, the value of the day, and then more about the avodah, as the Rebbe will articulate. We're learning this Lilu Nishmas Rav Levi Yitzchok ben Rav Chaim Tzvi Tein Nishmos Yitzru B'Tzrei Chaim. We'll go step by step. Let's look inside. Chayel Aleph. Wegen dem Tag from Chayelu, with regards to this day of Chayelu, which is the Yom HaHiladas from them Baal Shem Tov. That's the birthday of the Baal Shem Tov, which is in the 18th of Elul, Chayelu, in Shnas Nachas, Tov Nun Ches, on Yom HaYiledes, and also the day of the birthday from the Alter Rebbe, which is in Chayelu, Shnas, in the year Kahos, Tov Kuf Hey. Od Kvet Kidushas Meiri Choma Admur Gezogt in Asicha. So my father-in-law, the Rebbe, said in the Sikha, the Rebbe is quoting here, Bezel Shoinei, and the Rebbe is quoting now the language that the Friedrich Rebbe used in that Sikha that the Rebbe is going to quote. By Chasidim is Faran an alter Chasidischer Wort in zwei Aussprachen. By Chasidim there exists an old Hasidic word which has two expressions. It is expressed in two ways. Number one, Aleph. Chai Elul is der Tag, was hat gebracht und bringt a Leben in Elul. That Chai Elul is the day that brought and brings a life into Elul. That's number one. Number two is Chai Elul Gita Chayis. That Chai Elul gives an energy in the avodah for Ani L'Doidi V'Doidi Li, into the service of Ani L'Doidi V'Doidi Li, which is during the month of Elul. So this is not just expressions. The Rebbe brought it down, and he brought down both of them. And in this order is from them, was Kveit Kidushas Merichomo Admur, since he repeated both of the languages, his movement is understood as they Zain and Beda is gehalten. They are, both of them are accurate, and as in jeden Nusach is da an Öftu begabe, and that in each version there is something novel with regards to the other one. Otherwise, if it's the exact same thing, why bring down both expressions? It means the same thing. So the fact that he brings down both and he says them, that means that there is something unique in each one of these sayings. And as the Rebbe continues, and it's in this order of Aleph and Beis. So that means that there's two things, and you start with the first, and then you go to the second, and further. Der Fund, was Kvei Kedushas Meiricham Admur hat sie gesagt mit dem Seder Davke, the fact that my father-in-law, the Rebbe, said them Davke specifically in this order, Ubefragt, as hat sie zusammengewendet mit Aleph and Beis, especially that he identified them, he marked them. One is Aleph, and the second one is Beis. He's move on. It's understood as frier kommt der Inyan in Chai Elul. That first, number one, the Aleph is that in Chai Elul was said is that Tog was hat gebracht und bringt Aleben in Elul. It's the day that brought and brings a life into Elul, as in the first version. When erst der noch kommt der Beis, and then only afterwards comes the number two. Beis, der zweiter Nusach, the second language, Inyan Chai Elul, that the idea of Chai Elul is was Gita Chayis in the Avodah for Anila Deide V'Deide Li, that it gives an energy into the service of Anila Deide V'Deide Li. So, what exactly are the differences? First of all, they're both important. They're both must be unique, and it must be in this order. The Rebbe is going to discuss now and point to analyze the differences between the first language and the second language. Base. The Shinuyim zwischen the zwei Nuschos and all seinen. The differences between these two languages, versions are: number one, Zayin. In ersten Nusach, in the first language, is the Loshen. Over there, the language is Chayelu is their tog. Well, there's an emphasis saying this is the day. We're not saying just Chayelu brought and brings, but Chayelu is the day that brought and brings. Mashe'en came in Zweiten Nusach, but in the second language, state Chayelu Gizachayis. It doesn't say is the day. Under Hadgosha der Tog, there is no emphasis the day. Chayelu is the day. We're not telling you, it just says Chayelu does that. So that's a different. The first version emphasizes the day, and the second one just says Chayelu. What it does, Gizachayis. Another difference between the first and the second version. In ersten Nusach, it says, hat gebracht und bringt. 11. Brought and brings life. Mashe'en came in Zweiten Nusach. In the second language, says git achayis. So it's brought and brings in the first Nusach and git achayis. What is the difference between these two? So there's two differences. Was in them seine Faran zwei Shinuyim. Here we have two changes. Aleph in ersten Nusach, it says bringt, brings. There's a difference, and it's zweitner gives. There's a difference between saying that it brings and to say that it gives. The Rebbe will say later on, brings means you bring it from somewhere else. Gives means it comes from here, as the Rebbe will explain. And Beis, there's another difference in that aspect, that in ersten Nusach is as blois is as beloshn over unbeloshn hegel. Over there, it's both in the past and present. Brought and brings. Gebracht to bringt, hat gebracht to bring. Und in zweiten Nusach is nor beloshn hegel. Over here, it's only in the present. Git, gives. So the difference is in two aspects between gebracht und bringt 11 is past and present, versus the second one is only now, and also the language is brought versus gives, as the Rebbe will explain on this. Gimel, in ersten Nusach, in the first language says 11 in Elul. It doesn't specify, it just says in Elul, without saying Anila Deidi. But in Zweiten Nusach, it says Achayis in the Avodah for Anila Deidi V'Deidi Li. He specifies where it gives the energy into the Avodah of Anila Deidi V'Deidi Li. The Rebbe will explain all these details that the Rebbe is saying between the first and second version, where in the first version there is the emphasis on the day, not in the second version. It doesn't say der Tag. The second version is about past, present, and brings. The second version gives. And in the first version, we're just saying Elul. In the second version, we're saying it gives a chayis in the Avodah of Anila Doidi, as the Rebbe will continue to explain all this following here. Ois Gimel. Ois Gimel. So Ois Gimel, the Rebbe will explain the differences that he just brought out, that they're not just seemingly insignificant, but they are actually a main and important differences. Gimel, v'yeshleimar, so we can say, as the Shinuyim Anal, the above mentioned changes are nit nor Shinuyim Kalim Beloshin. They're not just sort of light changes in language between the first and the second version, nor Shinuyim Ikriyim in Teichim, but they actually make a main difference. They're changes in content. Aleph. The first thing is that bitui, when we express and say Chayelul is their tog, that Chayelul is the day, Vosulu, that brings the life. What we're talking about the day is Matgish them Inyan Hazman. That emphasizes the idea of time. Sizat tog, it's a day. Einer for the Yemais Hashana. It's a day which is one of the days of the year. But it's a special day, a single, unique day. Der Tag, this day, this Yom, was hat gebracht und bringt a Leben in Elul, that had brought and brings life to Elul. When man sagt aber Chai Elul Stam, when you're just saying the 18th, you're not saying this day, you're just saying 18th of Elul, is thereby nit azoy mudgesh der Inyan Hazman Shabai. Over there, we're not emphasizing this is the time so much. Nor beikar den Inhalt von dem Tag, but we're just talking about the content or the meaning of this day. When you say clearly their Tag this day, you're emphasizing the time of that this day is, versus in the second one, you're just saying Chai Elul, you're talking about the content of what Chai Elul means. In andere Wörter. The Rebbe explains this. In Zman seinen Veran zwei Inyonim. There are two things in time. Aleph etzem hazman, you have the time itself, and beis teichen hazman, the content of what the time is. There is the time, and what is the meaning of the time. Let's take, for example, Yom HaShabbos was in Zman Izer. If you talk about what is the day of Shabbos in time, Izer, number one, Einer von the Shivas Yimei HaShavua. It's one day of the 7 days of the week. One of the 7 days is Shabbos. Nor zayinik the Yom HaShavi, being that he is the seventh day. The Kol HaShavi and Chabivin, always the seventh are dear. The seventh are dear. Is Es Ayoim Miyuchat. So that makes it a special day. So it's one of 7 and a special day. Base, the second idea is the content of the day of Shabbos. The Yom HaShavi, Parmokten sich Kiddush Shabbos. The seventh day has in it the sanctity of Shabbos. Because the Kedusha mitzad atzmo is l'maylo megeder hamokim v'azman. That sanctity of the Shabbos on its own is beyond, above the definition of space and time. Nor that's the Kedusha. Nor the Kedusha is made in the Zman v'Yem. That sanctity, which is higher than time, shines lights in the time of the seventh day. So you have the day, the seventh day. It's a Yom Yuchad, and it has Kedusha. Then you have a Yom Yuchad, and it's of Kol Hashvin Chavivin. And then you have the fact that it's Shabbos, that the Shabbos is Kedusha, which is higher than time and comes down in time. Well, this is the erste chiluk zwischen the zwei Nischayim. This is the first difference between the first and the second version in this thing. Leuten ersten Eufen, Leuten ersten Nusach kommt to, according to the first version, it turns out, look, Leuten ersten kommt der Leben von dem Zman, der Tag, von dem, der Leben von dem Zman, der Tag von Chayel. So we're talking about the life of the time, the day, where the emphasis is the day von Chayel. Es ist ein ausgeteilter Tag, was bringt a Leben in Elul. So when we talk about life, we're talking about the unique of Chai Elul. The Chai Elul is life, and that day of life brings life in Elul. But according to the second version, kum der Chayis from the Teuchen Hayoim from Chai Elul Asmei. It comes not because it's a day, not because it's a special day, but it's what the inside, what Chai Elul means. The Teuchen Hayoim from Chai Elul Asmei. When we talk about in the first version, the emphasis on the day, we're talking about that the day of Chai Elul, which is a special day, it has life, and that is the life of Chai Elul, and brings life in Elul. But the second one is not that it brings, but it's the contents of Chai Elul itself. So this so the difference between the first and second version is, where does the life come from? Does it come from the day, or does it come from the Teuchen of Chai Elul? As the Rebbe said before, there's two things in every day. There is the day, or there is the meaning of the day. So according to the first version, it comes from the day itself. That's what brings the life. According to the second version, it comes from the content of Chayel. Another base, der Chilu Kanal, this above mentioned different is noch mehr Beule in the dritte Shinui. That could be more, stands out in the third change of Siv base, in the second Siv base. Zwischen the zwei Nuschos. Hey, next Nusach is the Loshen Alebun in Elul. Over there it says a life in Elul. Again, it's talking about the time, the month of Elul. It's not talking about an Avodah. And in Zweit Nusach Achayis, it says in the Avodah von Anila Doidu V'Deidili. He's talking about the service. He's talking about the contents in the service of Anila Doidu V'Deidili. Which means, in erster Nusach redt sich wegen dem Leben, was wird reingebracht in dem Zman von Chodesh Elul. The first language, which is talking about the life was brought in the time of the month of Elul. Not so much the content of the Chodesh Elul, but the time, the Zman. Mashenken in zweiten Nusach, as opposed to the second language, redt sich melchatchila wegen dem Teuchen ha'inyan. We're talking about the content. We're not talking just about the day, the time of Elul. We're talking about ha'avodah, talking about the service, the chayis, von Teuchen von Chai Elul, the energy and the content of what Chai Elul is, was gita chayis in dem Teuchen von Chodesh Elul, which gives a chayis in the content of the month of Elul, which is in the avodah, for Anila Doidi V'Doidi Li, was is Rosh Tevis Elul. But it's the Avodah of Anila Doidi. Aber der Wort Elul Atzmei Vert Don Niedermont, that is not mentioned over here. So the Rebbe says the third change of language fits in with the first change of language, as the Rebbe has explained. That in the first version, we're talking about the time of Chai Elul. And the life it brings it is in Elul. The day Elul, the time of Elul. In the second version, we're talking about the content of Elul, which is avoida. What is avoida? That of Chai Elul into the avoida of Anila Doidi V'Doidi Li. That's why it's already we're talking about the avoida part. Elul is just mentioned here as a Rosh Tevis from Anila Doidi V'Doidi Li, but we're talking about the content and the Chayis. That is these two, first and the third changes. But Gimel, der zweite Shina Anal. Also the second, number two change that the Rebbe brought down before, bringt or the gid. Either we say that brings or gives is a chiluk ikri, is a main distinction. Bringt a leben, when you say brings life, weiß at the leben guf gefindt b'mokom achad. That points to the fact that life is elsewhere. It's already there. You have to bring it. Und der Tag von Chai Elul is der Memutza. So Chai Elul becomes the intermediary that brings this life from somewhere else to another place, brings it to the Elul. Was bring them lebun mimokum achar. Brings means he brings the life from somewhere else. In Elul. It brings it from somewhere else into Elul. Chayel is the intermediate for bringing that life from one place. That means bring. Mashenkin gita chayis. But when you say gives a chayis, meant as chayel means chayelu. Chayis with delay gives its own chayis, as the Rebbe will continue to explain now. The difference and how the avodah of Elul has the two things, the avodah milmaila, Sichos of the Leila, and then the Sichos of Tata, as the Rebbe will continue to explain. Is Dalit. Yeshlemar Habir was that. The Rebbe says we can say, explain this. With regards to the month of Elul, we find two matters. The avodah from Elul is b'derech isarusa delatata. That the service of Elul is in a way of arousal from below. Elul is Rosh Tevis. Elul has the abbreviation Kinal. Anila Doidi V'Doidi Li. I am to my beloved. That the Yid turns to the Eibishter, and the Eibishter turns to him. So that's one area, one idea of Elul is turning to the Eibishter first. Anila Doidi. First comes I'm to my beloved, Avodah Sa'odam. The Nochvedeli, then comes the Sarusa de la Ela, that the Eibishter to you. Das heißt, the Sarusa de la Ela for Doidili, the arousal of above, the Doidili, is a Teitzoah of an Avodah Sa'odam. That's a result of the service of man. Man does the Avodah, the Anila Doidi, and then comes the Doidili, which is unlike the month of Elul. It goes the other way around. Nit be in Chodesh in month of Nisan. So Elul is different than the month, not unlike in the month of Nisan. Vasinyane is over there is just the opposite. Over there it's Doidi Li. Vasinyane is Harusa de la Ela, the Lashoina Pasuk. Over there it's mainly the arousal from below, as the Pasuk above. As the pasuk says, "Doidi li v'ani loi," that the Eibishter turns to me, and then I turn to him. Freer doidi li. First the doidi li, then no, do the Yisrusa de la v'ani loi, and then through the arousal of above, then the Yid turns to the Eibishter. Nochmal. More than this. The Alter Rebbe zogt in Likutei Torah. The Alter Rebbe says that as the V'Doidi Li from Elul, that when we have the Eibishter turn to Elul, the Hamshachas Elakusi is Baruch Lamata B'Chinas Galus, to bringing down the godliness revealed, is talking not in the month of Elul so much. It's not in Chodesh Elul. It's not like we have the Shirus del Tata Shirus del Leila. It doesn't come down in Elul. You have to wait for Tishrei, nor the Noch, Rosh Hashanah Chulu, but it's only after Rosh Hashanah. Well, the Inyan for Chodesh Elul is because what is the month of Elul? The Sarusa de Latata, the arousal of beloved. So, on one hand, we're saying it's all the Avodah Sa'odom, the Ani L'Doidi, and that brings the V'Doidi Li, and it doesn't even come down in Elul the Doidi Li. You have to wait for this Rusta de Leila for Rosh Hashanah. That is when the V'Doidi Li. But on the other hand, we find that even to have the Sarusa de Latata, we do have an Sarusa de Leila. We have Yud Gil Mitzrachamim. Li'idach aber, but on the other hand, however, Zog der Alter Rebbe Dor Gufa, there itself, the Alter Rebbe says, as Elul is Azman Funes Rotzim, that Elul is a time of goodwill. Zman his Galus Yud Gil Mitzrachamim. It's a time of the 13 attributes of mercy are revealed. Special time from above was there Gilum Ilmaila. That comes on its own. Vert Giton. That is accomplished nicht durch Avodah Sa'odom. That's not through the work of man, nor b'derech haserus leila. This comes in arousal from above. Hashem gives it on its own. We verstandig from the moshul, as understood from the parable, was that Alter Rebbe zog dort oif the end. Alter Rebbe says about this that this can be compared to a king was mekablim pon of basode. You go out to greet him in the field, and then it is permitted for anybody who wants to go ahead and greet the king. And he accepts everybody with a good countenance. And shows a smiley face to everybody. This comes the king on his own. The king is in the field and the king does it. You don't have to bring that out. That's available to us. That means that's Misarus de Leila. Why is that? Because even though we have to do the work ourselves, we get the strength from above to be able to do the work of ourselves. Although Elul's main aspect is the Razzle from below canal, but still, every service of a created being, we need to come on to us, we need help from above. While it's Sarusa de Latata on us, but we need for our Sarusa de Latata, also in the Sarusa de Laela, that Avodah of the service that we do on our own, we need to be helped with that Avodah as well. The Maimer Asal, as our sages tell us in Ba'ikra Rabbo, Allah Posik in Eiv, the Posik says, "Mi the mani v'ashalom." Whoever came before me and did something without me providing them the opportunity, I'll pay them. But to tell us that nothing comes before Hashem, Hashem gives us every opportunity, and that is how we do everything. Even the Sarusa de Latata comes Milmaila. And this is the shine of the 13 attributes of mercy on the month of Elul. This is the Sarusa de Litato of the Avodah from Elul. That's the Sarusa Litato for the service of Elul. Ani l'doidi li. I am to my beloved is to me. So we have the two aspects of the month of Elul. We have the avodah of Elul isarusa deletata that we have to turn to Hashem that brings v'doidili, but we also have the help of the Eibishter for this avodah of Elul by giving us the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim in the month of Elul to help us with our avodah of Ani l'doidi v'doidili. So, the Rebbe is going to explain now that even though Elul has both of these aspects, but what is the abbreviation of the Elul is not the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim. It's about the Yisarusa Dilatato. Hey, Afal Piaz Elul Hot Zich Beidin Yonim, although Elul has both aspects in it, meaning the Isarusa Dilatata, Isarusa Dilela, and also the Haoras Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, which helps the Isarusa Dilatata, which is Haoras Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim Milomailo, which comes from above. Uni Sarusa Dilatata, number 2, would come from below, canal. Doch seinen die Rosh from word Elul, Anile Deudi V'Deideli, yet the abbreviation, the word Elul, Anile Deudi V'Deideli, the Rames Davke from Inyan from the Sarusa de Latata, they specifically hint to the idea of Sarusa de Latata, the arousal of below to Anile Deudi. Why? The Shloimar, the view in them. So we can say the explanation. This Haoros Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim is connected to the time. The Sarusa de Le'ela from Elul, Haoros Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, this arousal of below of Elul, the Haoros Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, is verbunden mit dem Zman von Elul. That's connected to the time of Elul. As einen voran kama Zmanim b'shona welche seinen an Eis rotzen. There are several times, many times in the year, which are considered an auspicious time. Was is nicht verbunden mit avodas ha'adam, which is not tied to the work of the person. And still you can have an Eis rotzen, a special time of appeasement, a revelation from above. Now, der Eberster hat lechatchila eingestellt in Tava von Welt. That's the time, not many times that the Eberster set up. The world has the nature that during those times is special times. We have a special time in which we should give mitzrachim. The Eberster from the beginning has set up eingestellt in Tava von Welt. He set up the nature of world as these manim zaynim mitzad atzmon ha'isrots, and these times are on their own. They're a time of goodwill. Similarly, is as it relates to the month of Elul. As the Haoros Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim b'chodesh Elul, the fact that we have the ray of the 13 attributes of mercy in the month of Elul is set in the time, is mitzadem v'as chodesh Elul is an ha'isrots in the Maila. That means the month of Elul is above, is a time of appeasement. That's when the king goes into the field. That's the way it's set up. So that's the time of the month. The time of the month is that the king is in the field. But what is the content? What is the month? That was put into that time when the king is in the field. Is Adrab, is on the contrary, Davke that Inyan from the Sarusa de Latata Avedasod is specifically the work, the service of the Sarusa de Latata Avedasod. That's the content of Elul. The time of Elul is Yud Gimel Mitzrachamim. The content of Elul is Asarani Ledoidi. Both, Apianal wird man euch verstehen dem Chiluk zwischen den zwei Nuschos anal benegeit zu Chayel. Based on this, talking about Elul in general. Now we're going to tie this to the Chai Elul, how it has these two things. Just as there exist these two ideas. Which is from above the ray, the shine of the 13 attributes of mercy. In Elul in general, in the month of Elul, similarly, it's also as it applies to the 18th of Elul. As the Chayis was Chay Elul break in Elul, that energy that Chay Elul brings into Elul is in Beida Pratim Shboy, in these two areas, the two details. Sai b'negeya is Sarusa Shboy, both with regards to the arousal of above, which is in Elul, the Haoros Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, Und Sai in the Isarusa de Latata Shabbai, and also in the work from below, which is the month of Elul, the Avodah for Elul. The Avodah for Elul. So Chai Elul brings to the Isarusa de Elul of Elul and to the Avodah of Isarusa Latata and Nila Doidi of Elul. Der Tog von Chai Elul, this day of Chai Elul. Yom HaYoledes from the Baal Shem Tov von Alten Rebbe, which is the birthday of the Baal Shem Tov of the Alten Rebbe, is a Yom Zgula Uzman von Israel. It's a very special day. It's a time, and it's a period of will, of goodwill. Und der Pfarr hat es gebracht an 9/11, and that's why this brought in a new life in the Eis Rotzen von El, in the time of will of the whole month of El, in the Eirus von Elul, was kommt no Milo, and that arousal of Elul that comes from above. Mitzad Ra'oris, you'd give him Mitzad Rachim. That, what comes from Yud Gimel Mitzad Rachim, the Ray, in the month of Elul, on Chai Elul, gets energized by the day of Chai Elul, which is the birthday of the Baal Shem Tov of the Alter Rebbe. Und the Nach is from the Nach, that's the step number one. That's in the Sarusa de Elul of Elul, the Yud Gimel Mitzad Rachim. That the Chai Elul adds to that aspect. And the Noch is Faran, was Chai Elul Mitzad Teuchner. Then you have Chai Elul, not the time of Elul, Misarusa de Leila, but that is Farbundum mit Avedas HaOdom, Al Pitoidus HaChasidus, that is associated in time to the work of the person based on the teaching of Chassidus, which the birthday of the Alter Rebbe and the Baal Shem Tov, who are the founders of Chassidus. So the Avodah within the month of Elul, the way it's according to Teres Chassidus, that's the contents, that's the person's service. Gita Chayis in them Teuchen from Chodesh Elul, that gives an energy in the contents of the Salusa de Latata Niladoidi, in the Avodah for Niladoidi V'Doidi Li, in the Avodah of Anila Doitiv Doidili, as the Avodah from Chodesh Elul is with God and under Chayis, that this service, the work that we do from Chodesh Elul, the work of Anila Doitiv Doidili, is with much greater, entirely different energy once Chai Elul comes here. So the two Lashonis are addressing the two aspects of the month of Elul. The first language talks about the day of Elul, addresses that there is a new energy from the Chai Elul in the Asurusa de Leila from above. The second language addresses the Avodas Ha'odom of the main of Anila Doiti V'Doidi Lida Anila Doidi, that now that working because of the special Chai Elul brings in a new life into the Avodah on the contents of Anila Doidi V'Doidi. And now the Rebbe is going to specify the differences in the languages as expressed before. Zion. When the chiluk is mudgash in the shinu halashonis, in the tzveinis chois hanal, it's emphasized this difference in the changes of language in these two versions and besidra, in the order, Rebbe says, in the order, the way they come. That first, and then comes the second version. The Erster Nusach, this is also the order. So first we start with the first Nusach, Nusach Aleph. That discusses, that talks of the first idea and the accomplishment of El. The shine of the 13 attributes of mercy, which comes in order to arouse the arousal from below. Was kishem is an inyan from the Sarusa de Leila. Just as the 13 attributes of mercy come from the Lamaila, it's a Sarusa de Leila. So al derech ze oich der Leben from Chai Elul. So the life which Chai Elul brings is their mit verbunda, which is associated to the Gil Mitzarachim. Kum b'derech Sarusa de Leila me'imayla lamata. That comes. That's the part of Chai Elul, that special day that is set up in nature, that has, Chai Elul has that special day, that special life, Milmail Lamato, Mitzad them Tokinal. And that is because of the day. And when the far stayed thereby, this tells us the second change, the Lotion that the first change, the far stayed thereby, the Lotion that Tog was hat gebracht bringt a Leben in Elul. That's why it says this is the day that brought and brings life in Elul. Aleph. So what do we see here? That she's mudgish, there's man. We're saying it's the day. Chayel is their tug. And what? 11 in Elul. It's the time of the month, Chayel, in the time of Elul. So we're talking about, number one, the Rebbe points out in this language, we're talking about the time, not the content, time. Beis bringt, when it says brings versus git, Weiss Kenal Siv Gimel, that points, as we said before, in the end of Siv Gimel, as the Leben kommt b'mokamacha, that the life comes from elsewhere. From the Isarusa de Le'ela, that it comes from the arousal of above, which means it's not the Leben kommt nicht von Tag Atzmai, that it's not that it comes from the day itself, nor milmailo. Chai Elul, it's something which comes, and is Chai Elul is nor the talk about bring them Leben. It brings down that life. It brings it from elsewhere and it brings it down. And number three is Madgish Oivdem Over. We say also the past. Say Hod gebracht umbring. While that Inyan for the Sarusa de Le'ela is the Gabe Avodah Sa'odom. This is Sarusa de Le'ela, when we measure it to the work that the person has to do, is the Gabe Avodah Sa'odom Inyan for Over. Was kommt lifnei. It comes before to the Avodah, that it comes before and it gives energy to the Avodah. So that's why we're saying it brought and brings, because it started off, because that's the Sarusa de Le'ela, which comes already from before. So in all three areas we see, we're talking about the Zaman, talking about the day. We're talking about that just this day brings something from above, and we're saying it's in the past because Sharusa Le'ela comes before Sharusa Le'Tata. Ashenkin in Zweiten Nuscha, as opposed to in the second language, Nuscha Beis, that's wegen der Chayes, was Chay Elul git in dem Teuchen from Chaytesham. We're talking about the time of Elul, we're talking about the contents of the month of Elul. In the Avodah von Anile Doidi V'Doidi, we're talking about Avodah of Anile Doidi V'Doidi, was der Chayes kommt nicht von Zman. That doesn't come the time they're talking, nor von Teuchen HaYayim, that comes because of the contents of the day. Verbunden, which is associated, Chay Elul, with Gilui Teres HaChasidus, with the revelation of the teaching of Chasidus. That's the content of Chay Elul. And the first day, the Loshen Git Achayis, that's what it says, it gives. Weil der Teuchen von Chay Elul, Git Achayis with delay, because this content of Chay Elul gives, it's not just transferring, that brings from somewhere, but it gives its own Chayis in the Avodah. That's why it's Git, that it gives of its own. The content of this day, that we have Chassidus, that gives a Chayis into the Avodah of Nilu Deidi. Well, Derech Zeh, the Gabe, the Odom, and similarly with regards to the person, as the Chay is was Chay Elul, Git in the Avodah von Anilu Deidi, that Chayis that he gives from Nilu Deidi needs still the work of the person. It's not like a Sarusa Leila, like the Gil Mid Sarachamim, like the first idea, nor b'derech no mata l'mayla. It goes from below to above. Der Odom darfes arois bringen The person must bring this out from potential to practicality to his avoida. So it's milmata lamailis dani ledoidi that will bring about that gilui of the Torah Hasidus giving into the contents, into the avoida of ani ledoidi ledoidi. The rather fun avodas Hashem is in Vedic Tzos. The lesson of this in the service of Hashem is in both extremes. By those who are just starting out the service, by Aleph and Elul, they starting out the Aleph and Elul. Zokten them we say, as Chai Elul is der Tag, was hat gebracht und bringt a Leben in Elul. It's the day that had brought and continues to bring a life in Elul. Ait ken doch teinen, it can argue, wie is Shaykh as how is it fit that he, this the Mamod in Mitzvah, while knowing his standing and his condition, so Kenan Mekabel v'koilot zayin chayus v'chayelu, it should be able to receive and absorb the energy of chayelu. What kind of connection does he have to such an elevated day? So we tell him as even though you're just starting off your service. Und du hast nicht angeheben. Afilu da Avodah von Elul, you haven't even started. We're not talking about Avodah. We're not talking, you haven't started even the service of Elul. You're just in the month of Elul. So it would seem that it doesn't fit. In Avodas Hashem, to give an extra energy in the service of Hashem, which would be the loshen used in the sense gita chayis. It doesn't. How could we have Elul giving you a chayis when you haven't even started to do the avodah of Elul? You're just in the time of Elul, but you've not done the avodah of Elul. So how could Chay Elul give you an energy? Afal became still. We're telling him, you still have the power through this unique day of Chayelu. So I'll call upon him, bring an 11 in Elul. Minimally, bring down a life in Elul from above. You're not giving it, but you're bringing it Macham Achar. You can still bring a life in Elul, not in the Avodah of Elul, but in Elul. Noch mehr. Chai Elul hat dir schön gebracht, Aleb in Elul. More than this. Chai Elul brought you life in Elul. That's why there's also the past. You have already from inheritance from your parents, and your parents' parents, the far bringt es der Chayes euch in dem Heuwe. And because hat gebracht, and brings, it already brought you. And it continues to bring now the Chayes Eichen Amoy. So that's the Aleph, the first, the one who's starting, who hasn't yet done the Avodah. On the other hand, we have the lesson for those who are the leaders of the tribes, the distinguished people, as it says, that it is not sufficient for him, those was Chayelu, bringt a Leben in Elul, that it brings a life in Elul. But you have to accomplish that Chayis, Gita Chayis, to give, like in the second Lashon, to give a Chayis in Zayin Avodah from Elul in the service of Elul. So what would be a practical example? Ledugma, as for example. So, what's a practical example? The tell the study of Torah. Says nit genug that in that inyan from ligmar inish that let a person just study or ligra shmaito merabe to learn the lesson from his teacher, which would be the dogma to bring 11 that brings a life Was a Leben is freer nicht seiner. It was not yours. As kum de mokamacher, you're bringing it from somewhere else. So basically, your rabbi is teaching that you're learning. But as dar sein der Behoder Lisber, after when it says first Ligmarinish, then Hoder Lisber, you have to learn yourself. In addition to reciting. Toiras Rabbi, what his teacher told him, who he's putting an effort with his own seichel. So Masbir Zayin Tameo to explain the reasoning. These as a mechadish in Torah, to the extent that you also come up with novel ideas in Torah bedugma, similar was Elul Gita Chayis in the Avodah for an Ilil. Similar to that, Chayel gives an energy in the service of an Ilil, something new. The person is not just giving from what he has from his teachers, but he comes up with his own. He gives this extra energy. Test the Baal das Kveit Kedushas Merichom Admur. Since my father, the Rebbe, had gesagt berab and made them froze, said publicly both versions. And he instructed to print them and to publicize them. Is move on, it's understood as in truth, their both versions have connection to each one of the Yid, not only one version to the people who haven't done the Avodah and the other one to the Roshechem Shiftechem, but both of them to all Yid. Even one who holds the beginning of the service, Muzar wissen that he needs to know that in the end, he's able to reach to this as there's all given to accomplish, to give, git, like the second lotion, and to accomplish an energy in the service of Hashem on his own, not only to transfer it from above, but to have his own insight, his own giving. And also, on the other hand, in the darge, even those who are at the step as they tune in the Avodah from Anila Daily, that they are already busy with the work they're actually doing. More than that, they have the power to accomplish an energy in their service. They need to know. It is not entirely there, what's their accomplishment. But this really begins from the life that Chai Elul brings from above in Elul. So don't think it's just you that did it, but it is because of the special chayis that Chai Elul has. In the Dugma now from Likutei Torah, to give an example that we said before from the study of Torah, we said that you have to not only learn, but you also have to explain. Is the Gemara that said, on the other hand, the Negei Rabbi Akiva, the Gemara relates to Rabbi Akiva. Abishas Moshe Rabbeinu had gehört, wie Rabbi Akiva lernt mit seiner Talmidim. Moshe heard how Rabbi Akiva was teaching his students. He started teaching his students. He didn't know what they were talking about. He didn't understand. So he's weakened his strength, his power weakened. Till the Gemara relates further that the students of Rabbi Akiva said to Rabbi Akiva, Rebbe Menailoch, how do you know this, what you're saying? Amar lahem, halach l'Moshe Messina. This comes from Moshe Messina. His damul nisyashva daita. Then he settled down. That means, let's haste. Even those novelties that Rabbi Akiva came up with was the Faris Moshe Lo Yedem. That's why he didn't know what they were saying. Is Mekoirom from Moshe Rabbeinu. They all come from Moshe Rabbeinu. Halacha, the Moshe Messina. It's all based on the teaching to Moshe Rabbeinu. So that's, even the Roshechem Shiftechem needs to know that it comes because of the special opportunities of the Chai Elul, and that's how they have the koyach to be machadish. This is the Sichos Shabbos Parshas Topei Chai Elul Tovshin Men Kippur.